I saw a typo in some of these minutes somewhere. Brittany, we ready to go? Okay. All right, folks, here we go. I don't know where they found this thing, but quite a... Hope I didn't crack the countertop with that thing. Yeah, good morning, everybody. It is Thursday, August 29, 2024. Wow, rolling along through towards Labor Day. This is the meeting of the Housing and Redevelopment Authority for the City of Edina this Thursday morning. It is 7:32 a.m. And we have been doing these meetings in a hybrid sort of fashion, and sometimes there's two opportunities to call in and participate, both with respect to community comment and public hearings. We don't have any public hearing this morning, so the only opportunity for people to participate in the meeting would be through community comment, either here in chambers or by calling in the virtual connections that you might have. And here are the call-in numbers on the screen. And you should get ready and get those numbers down if you're listening into the meeting and want to address the HRA on a matter that's not on the agenda today or otherwise scheduled for a future public hearing. So we're going to now, having provided that information, we're going to call the meeting to order, and we're going to ask Carrie Teague, our Community Development Director, who is subbing in for our Executive Director today, to call the roll. He's a multi-purpose guy today.
Yes, thank you. Commissioner Risser.
Here.
Commissioner Jackson.
Here.
Commissioner Pierce.
Here.
Commissioner Agnew.
Here.
Chair Hovland.
Here. Next is the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have a form of meeting agenda for their HRA this morning. Is there anyone who wishes to modify the agenda on the HRA or from a staff standpoint? Is there a motion to approve the meeting agenda as published for the HRA?
So moved. Second.
Commissioner Jackson moves, Commissioner Agnew seconds the adoption of the meeting agenda as published. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adopting the meeting agenda as published, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And now is the time for community comments. So while we ask anyone in the audience if they wish to come forward and address the HRA, I'm going to have those numbers put back up on the screen again so people at home can, wherever you're listening in from, can get those numbers down if they want to call in. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address the HRA in a matter of concern to them this morning? Okay. Seeing no one standing up and coming forward or hearing anything, we'll turn to the virtual world and see if we have anybody tuned in.
We currently do not have any callers, but because there is a slight delay in the broadcast, I do recommend we wait 1 minute before proceeding.
All right. Thanks, Brittany.
Okay, we're coming to the end of the minute here, and we still do not have any callers.
All right. Thank you very much. Our practice is to have our Community Development Director respond to community comments from the prior meeting. And Director Teague, do we have anything that we need to respond to from the prior meeting?
Not this morning. There were no comments at the last meeting.
All right, very good. We have a couple items on the consent agenda, both draft minutes. Do we have any changes or corrections there? Otherwise, entertain a motion to adopt the items on the consent agenda in a single motion.
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Jackson moves, Commissioner Pierce seconds the adoption of the items on the consent agenda in a single motion. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the items on the consent agenda in a single motion say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. The items on the consent agenda are adopted. And then the heart of the meeting today is the reports and recommendations portion of the meeting. We've got one matter that requires some potential action on the part of the HRA, and one is for discussion purposes only. We're going to start with our Affordable Housing Director, Stephanie Hawkinson, who is going to ask us to approve a motion to allocate some funds that we have coming in from the state. And she's got some proposed allocation uses for what's called local affordable housing aid. And I'm going to turn now to Manager Hawkinson.
Yes, thank you very much. So local affordable housing aid, 2023 by the state legislature, purely for affordable housing. And the funds are collected from local area sales taxes, sent to the Department of Revenue, and allocated to metro cities based on a formula that has primarily, from my understanding, to do with housing cost burdened percentages. So each city in the metro gets a portion of funds from the Department of Revenue that is sent to our finance department, and it has to be deposited into a very specific account because we have to report every year to Minnesota Housing on how these funds are being spent. In 2024, it was clarified that these funds cannot replace existing funds that are used for affordable housing, but need to augment funds that are already used for affordable housing within a city. And again, the aid is distributed directly to the city. We already received our first portion for 2024. So how can these funds be spent? This first came up for emergency rental assistance. This idea of this local area sales tax was for emergency rental assistance. They expanded it during the course of the legislative session to support various elements of affordable housing. Bricks and mortar, helping nonprofits, still the emergency rental assistance, to help support supportive housing, an administrative factor, but it can't be like to offset my salary. It has to go out into the community to support affordable housing. And I wanted to show, since the formula is based on part on housing cost burden, that in Edina, about 50% of our renters and 22% of our owners are currently housing cost burdened. So you've seen these slides before, but I wanted to share them to give some context as to the proposal of how these funds should be spent. There has been growing disparities between the cost of rent and incomes. This goes back to 1984 to 2022, and it's a consumer price index, but to just show scale of the differences between incomes and rents, and it's just growing. People are becoming more and more housing cost burdened for jobs that they have or career paths that they've had or similar to people before them, and their ability to afford rent and housing costs. So the same job, what you could get 20 years ago, you cannot get today. Be that a daycare worker, a cook in a restaurant, a clerk, a teacher, a public employee, all those, the housing costs have just outpaced incomes. So people worry about Edina changing if we put in or support affordable housing. The reality is Edina is changing. Every community is changing, and because housing is becoming more out of reach everywhere. Here's another, and this is one that you have seen, about median housing values and the income that's needed to afford a median housing value, and how it's estimated that in 2033, they're going to be almost $1.2 million for the median price of a home. And so who can afford, even now, the median price of a home being close to $700,000, that's the median price. And with some of our programs, we said up to $425,000 is what we would purchase for a home. The amount of homes in that price range is rapidly shrinking. So I've shown this graph in other presentations, but I haven't presented it yet. I just wanted to explain this a little bit just to give more context. So this is how, for households that are 4 people households, and what those charts are, what they mean, and what is affordable. So if you're a home of 4 and you make $37,000, you earn less than 30% of the area median income. The maximum rent that you could pay without being housing cost burden is $931. The home value that you could buy is $111,000. If you're a family of 4 and you make $124,000, you're between the 80 and 100% of AMI. You can afford, all things being equal, without extensive bills or childcare costs and all that, $3,000 in rent, and you can afford a home that's $400,000. And again, the top of the list is we've talked that attainable housing being up to 120% or 120% of area median income. With that, for a family of 4, it'd be about $150,000, and the home value buy is almost $500,000. All right, that's compared to Edina. So these are the charts, and this is, based on, the chart is based on the federal government for this area. The median rents and the median home values are based on local Edina stats. So our median rent is $1,700 citywide. Market rate, affordable included. So that would serve a family of 4 that's in the 50 to 60% of area median income. Our median income is $126,000 in the city. That could afford a home of $500,000, roughly. But our median home values are about $700,000. So we are well above, our median home values are well above the median income household in the city. So let's look at it percentage-wise based on American Community Survey of who is living in Edina now and what they could conceivably afford. So for a home value that's greater than income of greater than $150,000 to get above that 120% AMI from previous tables, fewer than 50% of the population fits that. So far fewer than 50% of the population can afford a median priced home. We have 14% of the population that makes less than $25,000. We have 7% that makes less than between $25,000 and $50,000. So we have 57% of the population makes less than 120% of the area median income. Yet our housing costs far exceed that in both rental and, rental we're getting in the middle of that, but at least for home ownership of existing current residents.
Manager Hawkinson, hit the pause button for a moment here. Commissioner Jackson has a question for you.
Yes, thank you. So when I was looking at this to prepare, the question that popped into my mind immediately is we have a lot of retired people who are living maybe on Social Security. Can you break this down? Does it break down by age of families at all?
I have it in a later slide a little bit differently. I could.
Okay.
And I did have a slide about where households of childbearing age fall in this, and seniors clearly on the lower end. Households of childbearing age, there are more that reach that $150,000 a year point, but it's still a minority of the folks. And I could, on this format, I could do that. I deleted them for time.
Yeah, no, that's fine. But maybe offline, I would be interested in workforce age, so up to 65.
Okay.
So, maybe 18 to 65. I would be interested in how that demographic breaks into this categorization.
Okay.
So, because kids they may be making some money, but not, enough to support a household. I hope they're not supporting
Right.
households. Same with after 65, maybe you're working, maybe you're not. So that workforce age, I'd be interested in seeing that.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Will do. This touches upon that a little bit. So according to the census data, 74.8% of the white Edina residents own their homes and 25.2% rent. Conversely, 19.8% of Black African American Edina residents own their homes and 80.2% rent. So this also leads into our goals with equity and inclusion and where we're putting our efforts with housing. And so, you know, the focus on, and this is outside my presentation a little bit, I think we still need to pay attention to rental housing and not shift entirely away to ownership if we want to read the data and if we want to respond to the data. And here's a little bit to your question. According to the census data, 71% of seniors and 51% of households of childbearing ages have incomes of less than $150,000, which is less than what's needed to buy a median-priced home. Granted, it's a different situation. Seniors may want to downsize, not all. I talk to a lot of seniors, and there's some that just want to shift, maybe a smaller home, but not necessarily go into rental, and there's just nothing out there. So 26% of seniors have incomes less than $50,000, and so they would, I mean, that's 50% of our current population of seniors qualify for affordable housing. And 50% of households of childbearing age cannot afford a median-priced home. And so we talk about the school population and how we have 20% of open enrollment, and we're trying to attract households with kids. Our housing prices tend to be pretty high for people that want to start families in the city. All right, so that's laying the framework for this LAHA money, the real reason I'm here. So our allocation that came not from local taxpayer money, but from sales taxes metro-wide that all went to Department of Revenue and were divvied up according to this formula for 2024 was $340,000 roughly. We expected closer to $700,000, but it's lower than anticipated, and this also captures 7 months because of when the bill was passed and enacted. So it's a shorter time frame, but depending on people's buying habits, it will fluctuate. And what I am proposing is, since the initial intention of this money was for emergency rental assistance, that we allocate $100,000 towards emergency rental assistance and the remainder to one of our ownership preservation programs, where of the remaining few homes that we can acquire to preserve for long-term affordability, we add some money to them. Habitat is running low on their funds, and Homes Within Reach, I think, is on their last home of what they can use with their funds. So who is VEEP? VEEP is Volunteers Enlisted to Assist People, and they offer food, counseling, and emergency rental assistance. They've been in operation for 50 years. They work out of Bloomington, but they serve Edina, Richfield, Bloomington, I think parts of Southwest Minneapolis or South Minneapolis. And a representative from VEEP is here if there are questions.
Thanks for being with us this morning.
So beginning with the pandemic, we started giving them money. We saw what was on the horizon, that there was going to be a lot of people who were unable to pay rent. And through our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, the CARES Act, and ARPA, we were able to provide them with money enough, almost $1 million, to help 619 Edina households with emergency rental assistance. That many Edina households needed emergency rental assistance to avoid eviction. Yet, the need continues. We thought that there was going to be a bubble right after the eviction moratorium was lifted. It's been constant. The evictions are still happening at a really, really high rate. So 2024 statistics. 6% of the emergency assistance was awarded to Edina residents. People were denied that applied for money because there was not enough money and there was not enough capacity. They have few staff and a lot of people requesting money. So they have their applications open for a couple days at the end of the month. They get enough in where staff is just rapidly trying to process the papers, and they have to put a limit on that because there's only so many they can process, and there's only so many funds. So, but of the 23 that have applied or that have been awarded funds, they've used 16% of the funding available in VEAP overall. And there are still people applying, and like again, people have been denied due to lack of funds. So $100,000 is what I want to go to VEAP. The need continues, even though we're in a post-pandemic world. And these are our residents in the city. The remaining funds I'd like to help with our Affordable Preservation Ownership Program. This again buys homes that are on the market, or people have contacted me. I've received 2 calls in the past 2 weeks from people who are looking to sell their homes to this program. We're having a meeting about one of them next week. Habitat went and looked at it. The prices are getting higher. They're creeping up. We had a soft cap of 425. Homes now that are approaching us are at 500 or a little more. So we have to weigh that out, but there's just not much on the market that's less than that. So applying these funds towards the acquisition of these homes, rehab, and place them in a land trust for long-term affordability for ownership. Since 2020, 13 homes have been bought. They're sold for roughly 200. That number's creeping up a little bit. So there's about $300,000 of gap in a home that is in the land trust to keep it affordable for 99 years. So if you think of that $300,000 being spread over 99 years for a home, it softens it a little bit. 12 of those homes are now occupied by people, mostly people with young children. And the home ownership was made a reality for a researcher, educator, utility worker, chef, family advocate. So a lot of these folks have benefited from this program. So that's how I'd like to use our 2024 allocation of LAHA. It's for those 2 programs.
A quick question for you. Has VEAP exhausted the funding that we've provided?
Indeed, Mayor, Chair, yes, indeed they have.
Okay.
So the funds they're using now, there's an allocation from the county in the block grant funds. They apply to the county and they get a portion, but it's not nearly enough to meet the need.
Commissioner Mercer.
Thank you for that presentation. And the number, the 100,000, how long will that last? Will that last until we, presumably get another LAHA infusion?
I'm going to ask Carrie, if I may, come up. I don't know is the short answer. How long generally will that last? It's hard to say. Would you please come up and you have a better ability to estimate how long 100,000 will last than I do.
Yes, thank you. And introduce yourself too, please, and tell us the organization you're with.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Carrie Thompson, and I am the CEO of VEAP.
Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
And did you hear the question?
Yes, how long will the $100,000 last? I think that would for sure last through the entire year for us. Right now, as Stephanie mentioned, we are seeing an increased need again for rental assistance. It really actually just never went away. It's just most of the funds that we were receiving throughout the pandemic went away. One of the things I wanted to mention too, and thank you for that presentation, Stephanie, that was great. She had mentioned that there were 619 households that were helped by DINA funds, so I want to thank you for that very much. You were one of the first cities that actually stepped up to really help out at the beginning of the pandemic, so we really appreciate that. That being said, we also received several more $1 million in funds from other sources. So the number of households that we actually served throughout the pandemic was really closer to 1,500 households in the city of Edina who needed rent. We gave out close to $1.6 million in Edina over the period of the pandemic. So we are still seeing an increased need, as Stephanie mentioned. And right now, we are having to turn away households from the city of Edina. As she mentioned, we receive CDBG funds that are good for the city of Edina, and then some Hennepin County additional rental assistance funds. but we have used some of our cash reserves as well and moved them over into our budget to really continue to be able to help people who are in need. We have seen close to, we've helped about 50 households so far this year with about close to $50,000 of rental assistance. We've also had to turn away 68 households this year for various reasons, mostly due to capacity and or funds that are available. So this $100,000 would really go to help a lot of households that we are still seeing in the city of Edina, and I think that we would be able to use that throughout this year.
Follow on, Commissioner Risser?
Slightly different topic, but it does address rising costs. And I did really appreciate the email that you sent to us, Manager Hawkinson, about insurance and how that was having an impact, the rising cost of that. And we did hear several months ago, it was back in March, from a resident who came forward, Floyd Grable, to talk about rising interest and how hard, or the cost of insurance, and how hard it is sometimes even for residential facilities to get insurance coverage. And I'm wondering if you could sort of speak to the impact that you might be, how you might be seeing that.
Insurance coverage, I guess I'm not.
Insurance and just being covered by that.
Homeowners insurance?
Right.
So VEPA actually doesn't do work with homeowners. We do work with renters only, so I wouldn't have that information for you.
Okay, I asked this really badly. I'm just wondering if you're seeing that as being a contributing factor to rising rents and
Insurance?
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So the owners of the rental properties. Okay.
Yes, it's early. Thank you. Yes.
I would have to look into that data. I don't have that data with me today, so I'm not sure. We're definitely seeing a variety of reasons due to inflation, costs of everything going up for being part of the reasons why people can't pay. So I would imagine anecdotally that would be one of the reasons as well. I just don't have that information in front of me. You're welcome.
Commissioner Pierce?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is that what we're calling you? So thanks for the presentation. Really great data. I just have, of course, I support this. My question is, how do we prioritize the funding? And so if we have such a need from an emergency standpoint for people who may become homeless if they don't get that need, and then on the other side, we're trying to preserve homes for people to purchase that can be affordable, how do we figure out, like, well, should the majority of our money go to VEEP to help people who are currently in their homes and can't afford them to pay their rent versus buying a home and remodeling it? And so there's the tension of two goods is what that is. And so I'm just curious how you think through what our priorities should be at this point in time.
Chair, Commissioners, yes. I mean, $40,000 is not much to try to scratch the surface of all these needs. I was weighing it against what I've heard priorities are from the dais. You know, that we really need to focus on affordable ownership. And I've heard the need for bringing young families into the city to help support our schools. So that's really what drove part two. Yet I could not ignore the fact that current residents are losing their homes, and I'm getting emails and calls from people on the verge of homelessness. And I sent you one email. I could forward on dozens of phone calls. So I was really trying to do both with a limited amount of money that I have available to me to do so.
Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'd like to go into a little bit deeper about the allowed uses of this money. Commissioner Risser referenced this. We have seen with condominiums in town that the cost of property insurance has skyrocketed. Is it possible for us, because I know we did the bonding to help with repairs of a condominium association, is it possible for us to use this money to supplement the cost of insuring some of our naturally occurring affordable condominiums and townhomes?
Chair, Commissioners, I would need to look into that. That is a nuance that is not directly covered in the legislation. You know, they talk about financing the operation management of residential properties, but that was due to Common Bond and Aon and PPL seeking a lot of management support of these buildings because the rents weren't coming in and they still needed to pay their bills, and so a lot of nonprofit owners became underwater, and so they received an infusion, not nearly as much as they requested. So it's intended for that, for the management of affordable rental. I have not heard anyone talk about ownership because that's individual people rather than a management company that oversees all of that. Individuals are, although it's the HOA. So I need to do some digging on that for future allocations.
Yeah, I would appreciate that because I think that's, for the money we put into ownership, there are a couple other things on the ownership category. We've done this program of, Come Home to Edina. It's been a wonderfully successful program. It's also highly inefficient, as you've pointed out. We put a lot of money to help one family, whereas some other programs are spread to help more families. So there's always that balance as well between not just ownership and rental, but also, concentration on one versus helping a lot more people. So my other questions are, can money be used for the programs that we currently have to help people repair their homes, whether it's a condominium or a single-family home, or the environmental upgrades those programs we have?
Chair, Commissioners, yes, they can. We do have a rehab program that is still funded. There's still funding in our rehab program, and the priority for that is to meet health safety code issues and environmental upgrades. There is, as you have heard, there's housing costs burden and there's energy costs burden that also hits lower income households much more than higher income households to pay for energy costs. So with the Homes Within Reach and Habitat programs, that's one of their priorities too, is energy upgrades to lower the operating costs. These funds could be, and when I thought we were getting closer to the 700, I had a third line item on there that was for energy upgrades. We also have our 4D program that has a little bit of money left into it, and that is when a NOAA property agrees to keep their property affordable, they can receive a grant for energy upgrades. So that's operational. It's not very popular. I've had like 2 applicants in 4 years. Nonetheless, we have that, and there's still a little bit of money left in that. So we are trying to tackle some of these issues. And yes, LAHA can be used for that.
Okay, and then, the the Housing Foundation has a second mortgage program that's running out of money. Could we use this money for that?
Chair, Commissioners, yes.
Okay, so I will tell you where my priorities are. I think the housing assistance, these numbers about people who are really in need is alarming. I would give more money than $100,000 to rental assistance. I don't think, $239 is halfway to buying one of these houses, not even halfway to buying a single house for the Come Home to Edina program. So I would suggest, giving more for emergency rent, and then I'd like to see, maybe this year is too late because you've done all your calculations and everything. But as far as going into home ownership, this business of condominium fees and co-op fees and stuff skyrocketing. People have fixed incomes. They've moved into these homes with a thing, and now suddenly they can't afford to live there. And so it's a crisis on the ownership side as well, and that we haven't seen before because, 2 years ago, everybody got a new roof when it hailed. And now I think that's what caused the insurance to go up. So I'm really concerned about people who own their homes, whether it's in a condo or a co-op, which is what, we want to encourage people to have these energy efficient homes and not lose their equity, but they're going to because these user fees, really, or the condo fees are going up. So it may be too late to do anything about that, but, if we've got a housing crisis, people are about to lose their homes, I think $100,000 is a drop in the bucket. So I would double that and then put the other into one of the existing programs that we have, if it's that where there's a need. So if the 4D program, people aren't taking it up, I wouldn't put money into that. But if it's the second mortgage program or the environmental upgrades, if people are using those funds, I'd like to see that go into it. And the owners, because when I think of ownership, I think of condos as well as single family homes, and I'm very concerned about that population right now. So that's my feedback.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Agnew.
Thank you, and thank you so much for the presentation today. I think my overwhelming sense, and I kind of heard that from some of my fellow commissioners, is there's just not enough money, right? And so I'm sitting here just thinking about how do we continue looking for additional sources? And I know that's not the topic of discussion today, but just know that that is continually what's in the back of my mind, and I know in the back of your mind as well. And so with this money, I feel that this is the right proportion to go into the VEAP emergency as well as the affordable ownership. Reasons being, we had the wonderful CEO come and speak to the fact that this probably feels like the right amount. It sounds like for the next however amount of time, the year or to the end of the year, I wasn't quite clear, but I don't want to over allocate and have it go unused. And so it's kind of that balance I think that we're all trying to find is, as much as we can forecast what's going to be the right amount, put that towards the VEAP component, and then everything else I'd love to see in the home ownership opportunity, because I think we should also start thinking about, and maybe this is where Commissioner Jackson was going, what can we do in some of these situations where even the home ownership that residents thought would be more stable or forecastable is no longer affordable for them? Are there opportunities? Are there new programs we can think about? Are there different ways that we can help those residents in particular? I don't know the answer to that, but that's where my mind goes, is we have new problems, I think, that seem to be arising because of the high cost of insurance, the inflation of HOA, that we hadn't come up with a solution for as a city yet. Maybe it's time to think about, is there a new program that we should be adopting to combat that in particular? But at the same time, a new program isn't going to solve the problem of us still not having enough funding to do what we want to do as a community. So I think that this is as best as we can do with what we have. But I just want to plant that seed of think through, are there ways that we can very tactically help those people in need? And then just challenge the rest of us. We need to keep thinking about this because this isn't enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. A couple of questions for you. Our 2024 allocations on the screen. What's the timing of that? Is that arrived yet, or is it soon to come? And what time of the year is this allocation coming, and how did you go about estimating that our annual allocation be over double what it is over a normal 12-month cycle?
Chair, Commissioners, there's a chart on the Department of Revenue for LAHA on what each city's estimated to receive. And so when the legislation was passed, it showed that we were estimated to receive like $667,000. So I went off of that. And then a new chart was published once the tax revenues came in and were entered at the Department of Revenue, and they recalculated, and it came up with the 339. We have received half of this already. It's in our account. The other half is expected in December. I will say, since it's a brand new program, and this is for 2024 and it's August, that as soon as we have an estimation or hopefully, it will be before August of 2025 that I'll be coming back to you, because they had to get, it's a new program, and so all the systems need to be in place. As soon as I know 2025's allocation, and I'll be doing research ahead of time, I will come to you and see how you want that spent. I will also say it can be banked for a few years to accrue a bigger balance. My question with that is the VEAP need is now. People are facing eviction now. And to clarify, it's the Homes Within Reach program, not the Come Home to Edina program. And this would be coupled with money they're getting from Met Council and Minnesota Housing and Hennepin County to buy the homes, but this would be the approximate gap. Those homes, the amount available and the price points that make this program reasonable, those homes are disappearing every day. So that's why I did not recommend banking this, because the needs now aren't going away and they are exacerbating. But I will, that HOA fee is also a need that's now, and I will look into that for 2025. But this is how, so to answer your question, we have received half. The other half is expected to end up in our accounts in December.
Okay. And do you expect our allocation over a full 12-month period to closer to the 667 than what we did get this year, because it was a shorter time span? Or don't you have a sense of that?
It's hard because this is 7 months worth, and so if it's 70% of the whole, it would still be hard to get to the 667. It depends on people's spending habits. People need to go shopping and pay sales tax, and that's how we get the funds. So it depends on people's shopping habits.
One thing that was helpful to me this morning was hearing Ms. Thompson say that 100,000 would get us through a year.
The end of the year, I believe.
Yeah, end of the year. And so then we'd be coming up on another allocation period, and we really rely on your advice. I mean, you're in this every day, all day, getting calls from people, understanding what the rhythm of things are and where the needs are. So personally, I'm pretty comfortable with what you recommended. I'm comfortable with it because I think we meet the needs at VEAP through the end of the year relative to Edina. And then this affordable home ownership issue is an important one, I think, to be thinking about. We know from that work that Hazel Reinhardt did for the city and the school district, the former state demographer, that the kids are in single-family homes. And every kid in a seat at the school is $8,000 or $10,000 a year from the state. That's we know, we've learned that that's the primary source of their funding. So I like this notion of allocation, and in terms of nuancing it, I don't think I'd do as good a job of that as you would. And that's why I count on you to come up to us with these recommendations on how to use these LAHA funds. So at least on the first go around, I'm pretty comfortable with, or very comfortable with what you recommended. I don't know if that prompted anybody else to have anything they wanted to comment on. Commissioner Risser?
I too am very comfortable with this, and I didn't mean to open a can of worms by talking about the insurance going up. So, yeah.
Chair, Commissioner, that's an issue, and it needs to be addressed somehow. I just don't know at what level, if it's a federal level, city level. I don't know.
This has prompted more thought here. Commissioner Pierce? Commissioner Jackson, go ahead.
Yeah, so I didn't want to, I want to say thank you. You have put a ton of time into this. I have to ask questions because there's so many needs, and I was going to raise the insurance issue on my own, so it wasn't a can of worms, but it's a huge need that's out there. Thank you for clarifying on the home ownership, because I looked at that $240,000, and I'm like, so thank you very much. If it can be spent, that'd be great. And so, yeah, this is our first shot. I think this is good. I do worry about people losing their homes, because it's horrible for the families And it's so much more expensive to get them into homelessness, out of homelessness, and into a home, rather than to keep them in their homes. So it's traumatic for them. It's expensive for everybody else. So I will rest on your expertise on the $100,000. But I did want to express that's alarming to hear that people are about to lose their homes. So I will approve the allocation today, but with the new ideas out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Pierce.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I just wanted to just underscore a couple of things. One, I really appreciate you highlighting that we trust the experts and the staff to really make the right decisions with this funding. And so I definitely agree with that. It is, and we sit on the dais, we get the information, but you're in it every day. And so it is, I definitely put more weight on your recommendation than just my own, because I know that you're in it every day. And then the second thing I wanted to go back to Member Agnew's point about funding. This is an issue of funding, right? And we do need other sources to really be able to start to make a dent on this. And the Edina Housing Foundation is doing some strategic work to kind of think about that as well. And I think at the start of the year, we are going to have to lean back into, all right, what are some other sources that we can utilize? And this might be controversial, but I'll say it, why not? It does strike me that we can do a sales option, sales tax for parks and get that to pass 75%. But when we look at other issues like this, it's just harder to convince people that this is not a problem just for lower income earners. This is a problem that will permeate throughout all of Edina if we don't figure out a way to solve it. And Mayor has said this numerous times. It's not just a problem in the state of Minnesota, right? This is every state is faced with this. And we definitely will need to lean into trying to figure out, well, what are some other funding sources that we can leverage to really make a dent in keeping people in their homes if there are rent challenges, and then as well as preserving affordable housing as well. So thanks for all the work that you've done to date.
So you are requesting the HRA to approve the allocation of the 2024 LAHA funding as recommended, and authorize staff to engage with the city attorney to draft the appropriate funding agreements to be presented to the HRA board for final approval. Is that correct? Okay. Is there a motion to that effect?
So move. Go ahead.
Member Risser moves, Commissioner Risser moves, Commissioner Jackson seconds the motion as stated. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried? Thank you for that presentation. And now Bill Neuendorf, our Economic Development Director, is going to help set up the stage for an update on this concept we've been talking about as a possibility, so-called France Avenue pedestrian crossing.
Yes, good morning. Our second topic this morning is actually the continuation of a discussion we began in late July about the potential to create a pedestrian crossing at France Avenue that would connect the two projects at 7200 and then at 7235. So this morning we wanted to finish that conversation. When we started that, you all had several questions and wanted to have more conversation, so we were able to schedule this time to finish that. A reminder that this is for discussion only. It's a concept. And at this point, we're not seeking any direct action from you, not an approval or a denial, but we wanted to make sure that you've got the most up-to-date information that we have. We just received the draft report from the engineering firm, and they're here this morning to present an overview of that. It's the same update, the same images you saw a few weeks ago, but just in more of a narrative type of fashion. But the reason that we're continuing with this conversation is because time is of the essence. If this is something that we think is worth pursuing, staff would need to be aware of that in the next few months with the capital improvement plan coming up, with these two developers moving forward with their plans. What we're trying to do is have the developers build as much of this as they can, if it's something that we want to see. And they move at a faster pace than we typically do. So time is of the essence there. But again, this morning, I'd like to introduce Mike Fisher and his team from LHB, and they'll run through the presentation. We're going to hope to go through the presentation quickly so that we can get to your comments, questions, and discussion. And with that, I'll turn it over to the team at LHB.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Mr. Chair, Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to present our feasibility report here today. Bill called it a concept, and I actually want to say that it's not a concept. This is really, and I'm going to show something. So that was a concept.
Would you introduce yourself too, please?
I'm sorry, Mike Fisher with LHB.
Thank you.
This was a concept, probably from late last year, as we went through that whole brainstorming exercise to see if something could work here that had the right sort of human experience attached to it, where we could either cross over or under the street. And so we were asked to then put together a team to study, is it feasible? Can we make this concept work? So the report that you got is a draft, and it's a draft because we want to get your comments and staff comments before it's finalized. So we put together a team to see if this was feasible. Brad Reifsteck will be talking in a minute. He's managing the engineering side of this. Behind him, we have Matt Settergren, who leads our transportation division, so very experienced on roadway design. We have John Cedar, who leads our bridge division. And so the two of them are very critical to this. Now, they're not here talking. They're kind of in our conversations with the county, and they're looking at sort of the design and thicknesses of structures and all those sorts of things. But I just wanted you to know that there are people on the team that you're not seeing here. And we have Michael Schroeder, who's looking at the human experience side of this, which is identified by all of us as really critical if this crossing is to be successful. So what we talked about with that concept is, not talking about a tunnel under the street, but more of this bridge like on York Avenue. And that was the idea is that possible on France Avenue? We showed you the latest sketch plans, just kind of a collage of the developer's plans. And what's interesting is as we went back and sort of looked at the planning that's done up to this point, it was actually shocking to me that for 20 years, studies have pointed to this site as the place to make a crossing if we were to make a crossing. And all of those studies sort of refer to the fact, well, if ever there was an opportunity where there was redevelopment happening on one or both sides, that would be a great time. So I'm just going to jump to the sort of the answer in our feasibility report, which is we believe that this crossing is feasible from an engineering, constructability, and human experience perspective. Financial feasibility is really going to ultimately be your decision, not ours. So, but we're going to share a little bit about what we believe costs might be and what funding sources might be available. So I think we're going to start with Brad just to very briefly talk about the engineering aspects.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Brad Reifsteck. I'm a Senior Project Manager with LHB. The graphic on the screen here indicates the construction limits that it would take to accommodate a bridge underpass for France Avenue. The yellow is indicating the roadway pavement, and the red indicates the concrete curbs and gutters and medians. A couple takeaways here is that the lane configurations would not change for the southbound or northbound lanes, and the overall width of France Avenue would not change. There are some slight modifications that would be needed for the center median and the right turn lane that goes into the Byerly's and existing Macy's property on the east side. So this next exhibit shows those modifications that it would take to, again, provide that experience for the underpass. The widening of the center median would provide a larger gap to add the natural light that we're looking for, but it doesn't really impact the through lanes on that northbound lane. There is a little taper that occurs there now that is used to avoid the median that is protecting the left turn lane that goes to 72nd Street there. And then the other significant change that we're proposing is to reduce the deceleration lane on that right turn lane into that existing private driveway that goes to the Macy's and Byerly's property. Again, this exhibit was shared the last time we were here. The focus here is more on the lower half, the graph. This would be the profile of France Avenue. The existing profile is the bold black line. The proposed profile would be the green line that goes over the top. Again, we have approximately 7 feet in difference between the existing and the proposed elevation that would be needed to accommodate the bridge underpass, the approximate elevation of France Avenue, if this would to occur, would be about 860 feet, and the existing profile is around 853, so approximately 7 feet difference in height. I think this next photograph illustrates the existing conditions. We're standing here at the intersection of Gallagher Drive and France Avenue looking north. And the existing parking lot of Macy's is around 860. So that's where the new bridge potentially could be at the same elevation of that existing. So again, we think that this location is probably the most feasible location for this type of underpass, just because of the existing conditions of the two developments on either side and the existing roadway profile and the ability to raise France Avenue in a reasonable manner to get to build the bridge underpass. So with that said,
Mr. Rakestad, Commissioner Jackson has a question for you.
Sure.
Yes, what you just said was extremely important. This is the most feasible spot to put a pedestrian crossing over France. Compared to what?
So I think Mr. Schroeder and Mike will address those concerns. I know Mike and Mike have looked at other options within the city, and I think they'll go through some of that detail.
Well, this is an engineering question.
Sure.
So given that, France looks flat, but it isn't, obviously. Engineering-wise, this is a really good spot to put a bridge underpass kind of thing from an engineering perspective.
Correct.
And did you compare this to other spots along this stretch of France Avenue?
Not from an engineering perspective.
Okay, thank you. That's what I wanted to clarify. So good.
I'll just add one comment. Thanks.
Yes, please.
Chad Milner, city engineer. This point's unique because you can see the road is sunk down compared to the adjacent properties. We don't have that any other way on France, so that just makes it an order of magnitude easier to do an underpass because we have the ability to raise the road and still match those adjacent properties. So I would say we haven't done an in-depth review of this whole corridor, but this is one of the easiest spots to do an underpass bridge.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Michael Schroeder. I'm a consultant to the LHB team. So to answer a question that was raised a long time ago, it was about the location. Where is it possible to cross France Avenue? And we did a diagram here that begins to show like the possibilities, and it builds on some of the work that's been done in the past. Probably maybe 15 years or so ago, there were intersection improvements that were using some dollars that were available in the city. Those are identified in the dark red kind of circles, and there are some abilities to cross there, but it still puts pedestrians and vehicles in the same crossing pattern. What the diagram really focuses on, the two portions of the Cornelia neighborhood on the west side of France Avenue, and where else could they cross if it wasn't for those crossing points. And it really comes down to, even if you look all the way across, and we did this kind of diagramming in kind of a dendritic pattern, like a leaf focusing back on the main vein. They come to a point on the north side of 70th and at the south side. The north side, they come to 68th, and they somehow have to get across that big parcel to get to France Avenue. On the south side, with the exception of the area around the Cedars, most of the neighborhood can only get out at 72nd. And the 72nd, as Brad and Chad were kind of referring to, becomes kind of the low point in this crossing. But there isn't a point to cross there because there's no controlled intersection. This being just half a parcel away or between two parcels actually becomes an opportune crossing from where people are coming from and trying to get across France Avenue. So this kind of builds on some of the questions that were asked earlier about where would people be crossing. It's not an engineering study, but rather where does it actually become possible. One of the other things we looked at is just the population in this area. And when you add these four census tracts together, you come up with a population of more than 10,000, almost 12,000 people, which is a significant portion of the population of Edina that we would hope is crossing, either to get to a school from one side or to get to Centennial Lakes Park and the shopping and other experiences of Southdale from the west side. So this is a significant potential number of people who would be looking to cross France Avenue. We looked at circulation, and this is a really another kind of crude diagram. And as Michael Fisher mentioned, we shouldn't be looking at this as a design because we're looking at it from a feasibility study. But we are beginning to bring some design into it because it's important that when we create an underpass that people will actually want to use it as opposed to crossing at grade or the more difficult prospect of getting people to go up and over France Avenue. So we looked at, could we actually make the grades work from an accessibility perspective? This is a route that we need to meet the requirements of the ADA, and it's particularly difficult on the east side, more difficult, I would say, but it is possible. So we did this diagram to demonstrate that's possible. And we also recognize that there needs to be potentially pedestrian and bicycle movements north and south parallel in France Avenue. So the gray on the west side is the potential bicycle movements. The pink would be the pedestrian movements, and the blue is kind of the combined feature on the east side of the street, each leading to the underpass that's highlighted in the black. So this is intended to show that there is a potential. The circulation actually works. The grades actually work from a pedestrian perspective, and then really it comes down to some of those features around what is it actually like to use this facility. So if we can make all the engineering work, will people actually go to this place and experience it as they would the rest of the Centennial Lakes and Promenade features? And this also ties in with one of the notions of the Southdale plan, which was the design experience guidelines. We wanted to make certain that as we look at the Southdale area when we did that plan, that it was about the experience of humans in a district. And so we wanted to apply some of those same principles. So we created some really simple sketches, kind of looking north along France Avenue, and you begin to see the kind of, and there's lots of refinements that need to be made. Like, for instance, on the east side, we probably wouldn't have these tall walls. They would be tapered back. There's some limitations to what we want to do, but we wanted to begin to suggest a certain kind of character And it becomes important when we get, as we move through here, that we have steps to climb. We need to make those steps interesting. So in this case, we're proposing that maybe the steps actually have little side pockets where people can sit and actually habitate the steps, as opposed to just having this large bank of steps that rises up to that space that passes between the buildings on the east side. And you begin to see the bridge itself, and it's I think it's a detailed question of whether it's actually a single bridge with an opening or two bridges. But the opening in the middle becomes important because there is that opportunity to bring light down into the underpass. So as we approach that, we get to this, just kind of circling around here, we'll get to what it looks like. And again, what it is in the middle, whether we have some kind of covering over that opening or not, we're still looking at that. We felt it was important to at least begin demonstrating something, because there is a potential for snow and ice, or whatever the combination is of that, as snowplows come through, to be dumping down into the corridor that's created below. This is looking southward, focusing more on the East Passage. But then you begin to see like what the bridge actually looks like. On the east side, we might actually have a pedestrian bicycle bridge that covers over a kind of a sunken courtyard that begins to go under the main bridge. And as we pass under here, I'll point out some of the factors that I think are important. This is a narrower passage than what we've talked about before. We first started out with a passage that might be 50 feet wide. We're actually at 24 feet wide. And what we understood as we kind of modeled this is that at 50 feet wide, it's really loses that human scale. It's really too wide. If we go narrower, 12, 14, 16, and you try to put pedestrians and bicycles together, it becomes too narrow. So we landed on a passage that's about 24 feet wide with an ability to see straight through from one end to the other. We're not hiding the destination point at the other end. And you can see even that little bit of light that falls through the middle becomes important, because it's a destination point for people as they walk through. The other thing that was interesting as we walked through this is that we introduced a curve on the north side, just so there's some more dynamic sense to this underpass. And we don't think that we can do it without really articulating some kind of, like, maybe art panels on one side and art features that kind of reach up and kind of envelop people on the other side. So some depictions about what the character of the underpassage is becomes important. Again, it's not a design. It's really just beginning to articulate what an opening that is about 11 or 12 feet high by 24 feet wide looks like, and how does it begin to accommodate people as both pedestrians and bicyclists. And this is just a little further into it. And then I'll turn it back over to Mr. Reefstock.
Thanks, Mr. Schroeder.
Yeah,
Schroeder, can you come back up for just a second before Brad goes back? With respect to the lighting in the middle, one of the things that I think we all understood and liked about Centennial Lake's concept was that cars were going overhead, but there was plenty of light coming through. And it didn't feel like you were in a passageway or a tunnel. And that's one of the things that I am concerned about, is that the county is saying, oh yeah, okay, you can work in the median, you can work in the center median, and we can expand that, and you can get light in there. And this whole kind of concept of the Louvre is, I find kind of fascinating. But I think getting that natural light in there is really critically important, and I'm wondering if constraints that the county's put on us, is in your opinion, in thinking about the human experience, is there enough light coming in there to make a difference?
Chair Hovland, let me speak to that in a couple of different ways, because we actually modeled different scenarios with different openings at the top. I think I forget how wide exactly this is. It's not 20 or 30 feet, but when we first looked at it, we were wondering if we could actually take the lanes and move them outward within the right-of-way to create more space in the median. We modeled that. And then we brought them back as the county said, well, we really don't want you messing with our lanes. And we brought it together in a model that's more like this one. And what was interesting, even in this crude modeling, is the perceived amount of light coming through wasn't significantly different. We also looked at, could we take the ends, instead of making more vertical walls kind of north and south along France Avenue, could we tip those back to get more light, particularly from the south end? And it also turned out that it didn't make that much difference. Even at different times of day, the shadow or the pattern of light would move around in the opening, but the aggregate area of light didn't change that much. So we could go to a lot of contortions about moving lanes or creating like other passages for light to come through, but it didn't change the basic idea that there's a pool of light as you move through that really becomes a target and marking your progress through this. So we've looked at different options, and it turns out that the pattern that would align best with the county's interest is not that much different than if we could actually go to great lengths to expand or to shift the alignment of the roads as you move north and south, of the lanes as you move north and south.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. You know, Commissioner Jackson and I met with some neighbors a few weeks ago, and one of the things, it was the passageway became not a peripheral part of the conversation, but maybe part of it. And it was that same human experience that they were concerned about. You know, folks that live in the neighborhood, I think that both you and Member Fisher live in, that were thinking about human safety. Is it going to be a hangout spot for the people that are having a difficult time in life? Is there a potential crime issue there? And nobody has a sense of that at Centennial Lakes, where everything's so open and airy and well lit. And so I'm sure that you've thought about that too, knowing you and the work experience that you have. Could you comment on that?
Chairwoman, yes. So I would say that there is that possibility, but the idea, if you look at other places at Centennial Lakes, it doesn't happen. When you look at the kind of the corollary bridge at York Avenue, it doesn't seem to be happening there either, and that's actually a very similar dimensionally, it's very similarly dimensionally to what we're proposing here. But as we experience in Minneapolis, it could happen. And it becomes really, I think, as we've found, a management issue, because the design, we don't want to make the design experience less for those people who are using this space legitimately. So it really does become, as we found in Minneapolis, a management issue, and finding people who are facing homelessness and might be populating spaces that they shouldn't, to encourage them to move along. I will also just note that the cities, whether it's happening at Centennial Lakes or not, I don't know. I know that the people that we have encountered in Minneapolis parks do not want to be bothered by legitimate users of parks, and so they have found other places to populate. And even as the park board has taken steps to keep people from populating parks, the homeless population has found ways to identify locations that are not parkland, so they're not subject to our park staff going out and moving them along. But it becomes, I think, a management issue, and it would seem like the staff at Centennial Lakes, if there are these issues, are doing that well.
Seems like another comment you just made caused me to think that the higher the level of design, the less likely it is to create the environment for this kind of activity, whether it's homelessness, somebody looking for shelter, crime, whatever it might be.
Chair Holden, and it's why if you look at those, even though they're crude depictions at this point, the notion of introducing art and other features into this passage, I think, really becomes important. It's supposed to be a design space and not a utilitarian space.
And then from a design experience standpoint, or a human experience standpoint, when you first started this work, there's three ways to get across, right? At grade, below grade, above grade. And have you got any experience in Minneapolis, or do you know of any other experience where if we shifted our thinking and started thinking about going over instead of under, financial implications aside, do you have any data around that human experience that would be helpful to us in our decision-making process?
Chair Hovland, it's not necessarily Minneapolis experience, but years ago, as a consultant, I was working with the city of Apple Valley in its downtown. And as they looked at the bus rapid transit facility they had created with facilities on either side and an overcrossing with an elevator and stairs, they found that people would not use it. They would dart across Cedar Avenue, Trunk Highway 77, as opposed to using a facility that had been created with every accommodation for people to get up and down easily. And they ended up building a fence down the middle of Cedar Avenue to keep people from crossing at grade. So people will continue to cross at grade until there's, I believe, until there's an easily accessible route to follow. Going up to go down is something that people don't like to do. That's the example of Cedar Avenue. Here we have the ability to naturally descend from what might be called the West Promenade. I think we were calling that in the Southdale area study, to naturally descend to go down under. And we've been working closely with Brad and his team to figure out what that elevation is. So you comfortably descend down and you comfortably ascend back up to the point where you can enter Centennial Lakes. And in what the other important locational element of this is that you end up re-engaging with the promenade in Centennial Lakes at kind of that point where you can go south to Centennial Lakes, north along the promenade, east into Richfield, or if this were implemented, west into the Cornelia neighborhood.
Okay. This has prompted Commissioner Risser to want to ask a question as well.
Yeah, and I share many concerns of Commissioner or Chair Hovland, because when we think about Centennial Lakes and we think about the York Passage, we're talking about purely public realm. And what we're getting with this vision is a vision where we're bringing together the public and the private. And my concern, which I voiced back in February when we awarded the $80,000 contract to do the feasibility study, I specifically pulled it from the consent agenda and requested that we bring the area down so that it did encompass the Gallagher intersection. And the reason I did that was because I wanted to know that your team explored, trying to find a way where it could be a purely public kind of thing. And I'm wondering what you found.
Commissioner Risser, it's a good question. And I think it goes back to that pattern of movement that we were looking at. So this is, as I mentioned, from the west side, south of 70th. The neighborhood will largely, this is a logical connection to go eastward for most of that neighborhood because it's centrally located within the neighborhood. The folks that wouldn't be directly accommodated would be the folks coming from the Cedars, that area, who are crossing at grade today. But it is just essentially half a block away, a few hundred feet away, for them to get to a passage that's grade separated and away from vehicles. So if I'm understanding your question correctly.
Well, there's several things, and that does raise, to your initial point that people will cross at grade unless you fence them off. And we do have that existing traffic light there at Gallagher. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about a project that could be $20 million. And yes, we need to think about the community that is directly around it, but we also have to think of a broader user base. And so, and my concern from the very beginning has been, how does somebody get to this if they're on the 9-mile trail? And I still feel like I haven't had an adequate response to that. Because, thinking about the existing pathways that are there. So that's a concern. The other concern is there is a heaviness to this. And it is because you are literally going down below grade. And I know I did ask, and we can say it's similar proportionately to the York Bridge situation there, but it would be really helpful to know exactly how similar it is, because that little area, relatively speaking, where the light is coming through is limited. And, we've seen studies. You had that sunlight study with buildings rising up. I think you had the Pantheon. But those are buildings above ground, and you've got light streaming in. And this is in the middle of a busy road. And is there going to be flickering if you've got big trucks going by? I mean, is this going to be more of a thing that's like being by a railroad track and seeing how cars going by influence the light? I have so many questions, and I'm just getting very concerned about the order of things. So I realize I'm getting a little bit off track here, but back in February when we awarded that, I thought we were going to get a study, because the scope said that we would get the feasibility scope within 2 to 3 months, and that we'd get the full scope within 3 to 4, and that's passed. And And now when I read the material, it sounds like the study is intertwined with the specific site plans of the developers, and that was never in the initial agreement. And that makes me kind of nervous, especially when I read in the paper about the coverage of it in the Sun Current with the concluding line that the developers on both sides have been really wonderful in terms of being open to this, but understand there's a lot of frightening elements to this if you're a developer. So there's so much to grapple with here. And you're talking about feasibility, but as you noted, feasibility, you know, what is feasible? From your perspective, you can talk about the engineering. It's debatable about the user experience. And you're right, it comes down to us for financial feasibility. When I read that this needs to be included in the city's capital improvement plan, and then when I hear at the beginning of this meeting that there is a time crunch, time is of the essence, I am not ready to say, especially because we're going over the capital improvement plan and we see, you know, the care that is taken and all of the things that projects have to pass, the screening that staff goes through. We got that from Assistant Manager Lentz. And I just feel like, were we to go down this path and say, yeah, sure, we'd be short-circuiting the process and just kind of pushing it there. And I'm very uncomfortable with that. I've said a lot. But anyway, thank you.
So, yeah, I'm going to turn to Commissioner Jackson, but I understood the purpose this morning was to address the issues of engineering feasibility, the study that you're doing, construction feasibility. The human experience is why you're here, and the financial feasibility is yet to come. Public input is yet to come. I don't know, Manager Neuendorf, timing-wise, in terms of potential coordination with development on each side, I mean, we always understood, in my mind, that the reason this opportunity existed was because these two parcels were being developed across the road from each other, and it was therefore probable that if this worked, that we'd be coordinating with them, and it would be a public-private sort of enterprise. So, having said that, I'm going to turn to Commissioner Jackson. I don't know if you have any comment about timing, you know, because Commissioner Risser is worried about.
Sure.
Are we going to move too fast?
Sure. We want to be able to move promptly, but not quickly. Like, we don't want to rush into anything. But you'll recall, sitting as a city council, you're currently entertaining a final proposal for the 7200 site plan. That building could engage with a elevated plaza on the western side of the street, or it could engage with a lower plaza. At some point, they'll have to make that decision once they start building it. And so that's why I say that time is of the essence, because the private sector isn't going to just wait for us. They're going to keep moving. So if we really want to try to create something that is seamless and wonderful for the long term, we should provide our direction, whether or not we want to proceed or not. That being said, we're not looking for any hasty decisions. We need to really think through this. So that's why we're having the follow-up conversation this morning, and we'll continue with that.
Yeah, I'm going to turn now to Commissioner Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a question for Mr. Fisher. In your presentation, you said that there were past studies on this, and I think, you know, going back for at least 10 years, if not further. Could you tell us approximately where those studies are housed, and if you could share those with us, or are they city studies, are they private? Maybe. Okay.
Probably a better question for our staff.
Thank you, Mr. Neuendorf.
I'd be happy to respond to that. So historically, on my bookshelf when I started in this role quite a few years back, I was given a copy of the 2005 Southdale Area Land Use and Transportation Study. I presume it's on the city's archive someplace, but that was the first document that I found that called for some improvement at this location. That 2005 study was not formally adopted and not implemented. But that's a study, and I'm happy to dig that up and scan it if it's not already in our archive online. And then following that, there was a 2007 urban design study for the promenade. That's when we transitioned that York Avenue tunnel that was more like a farmer's culvert into something that was actually welcoming with art and broader paths and everything. So that 2007 study also documented that at approximately this location, that's where they were looking at some type of future pedestrian improvement when the timing was appropriate. Those are the two studies that I'm aware of. Somehow they would have trickled into our comprehensive plan back in 2008 and then probably in 2018, but those are those two original documents.
Okay, so first of all, thank you. And if you could find those so that we could read through them, I think that would be helpful. And, if we could post it on Better Together so the public could see it, I think that would be good. There is a sense of, where is this coming from? Why now? There's no data, and it's deeply baked into our understanding of the movement in this area. So I think that would be really useful to hear. So, Mr. Teague, Director Teague, could you tell us, I don't know what your title is this morning, would you be able to look at the 2008 and 2018 comprehensive plan and see if there's any reference to this in either the transportation or the land use study or the Southdale documents? I think that would be useful as well. Sort of see, how, if it's been out, reviewed by the public and everything.
Yes, we can sure do that and share with the commission.
Okay, great. And then, if we could, have whatever we find posted up on a Better Together page, that'd be really wonderful, and people could read that.
Mr. Rizzer?
I did look at the studies that are linked at the Better Together site, and I think it's the 2007 study. And there, yes, this area is noted, but there's also 69th Street. There's also 72nd Street. There's drawings of potential bridges. And what struck me there is all of those bridges were done in a way that they began and they ended on what was public area. So that it was very much within the public realm. The other thing is that the funding was already there for the bridges. And so, which is kind of an interesting thing. But there is some material up there, and I do appreciate that. I don't think it's all the studies that Commissioner Jackson mentioned, though.
Commissioner?
I do just want to clarify something. In both of these site plans, the city has an easement to use this space. So when we say public space, we have 100% access to these spaces in the way the zoning is set. And an easement means we have access to it. We own the use of that land. We don't own the underlying land, but easement is a property right. So I want to clarify that this is public space according to the law. If these are two developments are approved, this will be public space.
True. One thing, listening to the planning commissioners and their dialogue, and I thought Commissioner Miranda made some very good points that yes, with easements, you do have public access, but it's not the same as actual public space. And I'm paraphrasing very loosely, but he made the point that, he couldn't protest on the space where we have the easement, that there are differences to that. And I'm not an attorney, but I mean, he couldn't. There are certain things he could. You can go, because I was told that you can't, if you're a candidate, you cannot go and collect signatures unless you're standing on a sidewalk that is a public sidewalk. You can't just go stand in front of Southdale on their space. That was my understanding of it.
Yeah. Well, our attorney isn't here, but an easement is a full and free use of this space, which would include protesting, and my understanding. And I haven't studied this. I'm not issuing a legal opinion from the dais here. And our attorney isn't here, but Mr. Miranda's not an attorney, and you're not an attorney, but maybe we can ask our city attorney if that is the case.
Let me find out here what kind of time flexibility we've got. Because how far along are you on the feasibility study?
We just wanted to share a breakdown of the cost estimate and some funding sources. So just 2 or 3 minutes. It's really more about whatever you want to learn or understand.
Yeah, well, we've been learning as we go along, and I think there's been a lot of questions and more knowledge gained. So go ahead. I think you want to turn it back to Mr. Reichstadt, or do you want to go forward?
Yeah, so maybe we'll just kind of really condense this. Brad was just going to just talk about the little, and actually, why don't you just do it for 1 minute?
Yeah, so we put together these very preliminary cost estimates for construction for, the top 11 items, the bulk of the project to construct this bridge overpass and the reconstruction of France Avenue. So we've got the roadway bridge in there. We've got the pedestrian bridge on the west side. We're going to need some retaining walls. We need some utility relocations and some water main improvements as well. The sidewalks and the trails, and we do have some monies budgeted in there for some traffic control and phasing. We feel it's probably more of a two-season construction season project where we're doing work under traffic, so that's going to impact the costs as well. And then we've also provided some of the hardscapes and landscaped areas that Mike alluded to in his presentation. So I think Mike wanted to talk a little bit more about the funding sources.
Yeah, and as Brad's talking about, you're like, well, what does this include? So I just wanted to make sure we have a diagram in here. So the pinkish area or the reddish area, obviously that whole entire part of France Avenue that would have to be reconstructed. The number 2 there is that pedestrian bridge. And the reason we didn't put that on the primary bridge is, again, we're trying to minimize the time that you're under a structure. And that's why also earlier when Brad talked about the shortening the right turn, northbound right turn lane, I actually think that's probably the most important thing we're asking from the county. And I want to be clear that they haven't given us a written approval to do that. But I feel like they're kind of saying, that's from a traffic perspective, it's probably the lesser of their concerns. The reason that's important, that means 14 feet more of parkway on the east side of the street and 14 feet less of being under the roadway. So it's kind of a nice deal to kind of make this as close to the York Avenue experience as possible. The other opportunity here, and one of the reasons we're talking about this right now, is when we go back 20 years to the 2005 plan, which started in 2004, they talk specifically about this is a great place to make a crossing for all the big planning reasons, and if there were an opportunity in the future. That opportunity is today, it's almost like unbelievable. Wow, 2 sides of the street at the same time. And why that's important is the blue areas here. Is that, and when Bill was talking about, just sort of moving, if you are interested, moving along, trying to at least message to the developers that we are, or if you want to do it, that you're going to do it, the developers are going to spend money in those blue areas, whether we do this project or not. The fact that if we could get them to spend that money developing this parkway, that's money well spent. And that comes out of the amount of money that is in that cost estimate that Brad just talked about. So that's where those numbers can start, getting lower if we're working with the developers. And then the last piece is we believe there are a lot of funding opportunities. There's the developer-related funding, which is what I just talked about, plus, TIF revenue coming from these projects potentially. Yes, there's capital improvement funds. That's always an option that you have. But the grant opportunities out there are probably greater than they've ever been because of the IRA, because of the Infrastructure Investment Act. There's federal money flowing. And these are just a sampling of the ones that relate to taking cars off roads, putting people, connecting neighborhoods, connecting schools. These are all grantable opportunities. I do want to go back to Commissioner Rischer's question, because I don't think we addressed it well. So I think you were concerned about people are coming up on Gallagher. They're on the other side of the street on the regional trail. And this is on this other side. That is, now I'm going to forget the street numbers. It's 70, not 76. It's as Gallagher comes down, the next street where the trail is coming from, it's actually crossing Gallagher to get on that park lawn. Sorry, I should know that. So from Park Lawn to Gallagher, you're crossing Gallagher to get on the side that it's on. You don't have to cross. We could actually create that trail on that side of the street, and so they're not making that crossing up here. So there are ways to solve any concerns about pedestrians moving across that street in that way. So that's it in terms of what we were going to present on the feasibility.
Thank you for that. Your first comment, and this might be for Manager Newendorf, were you saying with regard to potential funding sources, part of it could come from developers who are going to do work anyway. Is there a potential TIF element here on this if it came to fruition?
Sure. Yeah, there definitely would be. If we do the tax increment financing, the developer would fund the initial construction. We would, per the term sheet, we would agree to reimburse them for that initial work with tax increment. But based on the scale of these projects, there's also a hefty amount of incremental property taxes generated that could pay for the actual underpass itself. Something that we wouldn't want the city, or we would not want the developer to build an actual road. The city would want that responsibility. And we think that tax increment could be one of the primary funding sources for that element.
This is for Director Milner. As we were looking at potential costs for Mr. Reichstadt, it caused me to think about some of the phone conversations we had with architects on pedestrian bridges.
Yep.
And you know, your sort of natural instinct is, Mr. Schroeder's concerns aside about whether people would actually use it, you know, no matter how beautiful it is. We looked at that Peace Bridge in Calgary, and my recollection is the guy said, well, that's a $50 million deal these days. And that if you wanted, I forget what kind of a bridge he called it, but it was like a minimum $12 million, $15 million cost, which is far different than what we're experiencing with the pedestrian bridge across the crosstown. But it caused me to think that if you thought that it would be cheaper to build a beautiful bridge across instead of going under, it may not be accurate.
Well, if the question is the cost between an underpass and a bridge, I think the challenge with a bridge is the distance. Just think of Roslyn Park. We got 500 feet. You know, that's well over a football field to do tie downs. Here, if we had to go up higher, we got one side where it's way lower. We got to make up nearly double that elevation. So just to find the touchdown points for a bridge is a huge challenge. We did look at it with a previous study. The bridge would have to almost touch down at Centennial Lakes Park on the east side. So it's just creating big bridge structures between buildings didn't seem like the right avenue. Cost-wise, we never put together cost estimates for a bridge and all those landings, but I think this is Mike's team. The structural engineers are doing bridges that are at 24 feet are pretty standard. They're easy materials, they're easy beams to build, and the cost, I'm not concerned about these compared to that Peace Bridge, which was a very long structure, had glass panels over a big river. And they're having some maintenance concerns we heard too. So we're going to consider the maintenance and operations of anything we move forward to.
Could I just add on to that? Chad makes a good point. So when our engineers looked at this bridge structure, one of the goals was to have the thinnest profile you could have so we get the maximum amount of clearance and the cleanest, easiest bridge structure. There's no columns. And that was the other reason. If you go to 50 feet, you know, to make that, like we originally thought, well, that might be a good idea because that's how wide it is at Centennial Lakes. Now you face the possibility, if you want to keep the structure thin, do you have columns? And now you have places for people to stand behind. We wanted it clean inside. And I want to reemphasize the point. There's $1.5 million in that cost estimate that's just for the architectural treatment of an underpass. That's to create light and I mean, I feel that would have to be fully lit all day long, right? Like, and so the natural light coming in isn't the only light. You have light, you know, it's not a gray concrete pass through. It's white or a lighter color, and that artwork and the lighting that's embedded all creates an environment. And Michael said, you have to feel like someone cared when they designed it, they cared when they built it, and they care about it today. And you're walking through something that's not just you know, sort of a forgotten piece. And that'll all be really critical in this.
Yeah, thanks. I'd forgotten that we had looked at that bridge issue, and so it's good to get reminded that that's been looked at, and Well, feasible, I mean, it's just, has its own set of complications that are much more expensive.
Yeah, and in the report, in the feasibility report, you saw that reference to that 2008, 2010 grant, the federal grant we had at the time, where we were looking at a bridge here and just thought this is not a good option here, and we decided to fix 3 intersections and make them as safe as you can for crossing France, right? Still doesn't feel nice, but it's better. It's got all the safety amenities that you can do today at a traffic signal.
Commissioner Pierce has a question or two.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When we first looked at this, you talked a lot about promoting safety and usage. And so just kind of 3 points, just on the engineering side of it. I really like the sight lines of the underpass so you can see straight through. And I think that actually gives us a lot of flexibility from a safety, surveillance, all of those perspectives, because you've eliminated like a spot where somebody could be around the corner, right? And so I like that. I like the fact that you minimized time underground. And I know you talked a lot about if people can see, and I might have this wrong, but I thought you said natural light, that gives them a better sense of a destination than even like artificial lighting. And so having those 2 points that are natural light in the middle, I thought that was excellent. And then we didn't necessarily, I don't think we talked about this point, but I actually like the fact that this is kind of going back to Member Risser's question about public versus private. I kind of like the fact, we did talk about this, we talked about usage, that on either side, at the time we were like, well, there could be retail on either side, right? And so now we know that's probably not the case. There's probably retail on one side, there's residential on the other. But there's activity at both ends. And so because of that, that's another thing. When you see more people, that gives you that sense of safety, especially if you're going underground and there are others, even 1 or 2 other persons going through with you, that also promotes that sense of safety. And so I definitely appreciate it this time around, being able to kind of sense how those 3 elements came together from an engineering perspective. And then I had 2 questions, and these may be both for staff, I'm not sure. The one that I'm not sure about, I'll start with first. You had a slide in here that talked about the number of residents and homes to kind of get at, I think, usage. And so that's actually my ask is, as we move forward, is there some way to get a better sense of how often this would be used? So that's one question.
Great question. We hear that a lot about our sidewalks. We can't really predict. We look at usage afterwards and we measure how many people are using it. We know if we build the right facility, the right concept, like we've been talking about, people are going to use it. We know there's a need and a want for it. Mm-hmm. We've seen that on all the, I would say, normal sidewalks. This one's above and beyond. And when we look at the use at Centennial Lakes Park, I think we'd have very similar usage here. So,
Mr. Schroeder.
To add to what Director Milner is saying, what we have found in Minneapolis is there is a latent demand for trails and pathways that's extremely difficult to calculate. When we create a new park, when we create a new trail, open a new trail, its usage is far higher than we could have estimated using any kind of statistical analysis. And because it's the latent demand, it's the people who would never have walked before, who would have always driven, and now they have a different option available to them.
Yeah. And I think what's in my head, just to give you an idea, is we're not, although we kind of look at this as though we're creating a new pathway, you're connecting it to things that exist. And so being creative and saying, all right, on Centennial Lakes, here's how much traffic today is there in the promenade. And if we have this connection and if we have the signage correct, right, there's more people that would go through this because there's something on the other side that draws them. Those kinds of things to try to be a little bit more predictive is what I'm getting at there.
Yeah, and I can add one point. We're a unique area here because we have the 9 Mile Creek Regional Trail.
Yeah.
They have counters in 2 locations in our city along the trail, so we can get counts of how many people are using the trail.
That's
and
what
then
I'm
we can
looking
just
at.
say, well, if half of those people, we got X number already just using this. So
There you go.
Yeah, I think that's an important point you're making, is that this doesn't just have neighborhood implications. It has citywide implications, and it has regional implications.
regional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which also plays into the funding. In the report, in the appendix, I have some photos walking along, along the sidewalk on the west side. And I will say, no, this is my very non-scientific answers to your question. The people in that neighborhood have learned you don't try to go walk along France Avenue to make that crossing. So like right now, even if you can get to this intersection, that sidewalk is about as scary as a sidewalk can be, because you are literally a couple feet from cars going 40 miles an hour. We all know the distracted driver thing. What I was shocked by, and I've spent a lot of time out here in the course of this feasibility study, and as I walk around, the number of people midday, in the middle of a weekday afternoon, shocked at how many people are crossing and trying to use this trail. And they're using it, right? It's just that feeling, and even just for me, and I feel like I'm pretty experienced at this stuff, crossing that street at a light felt really intimidating, just because of the sheer number of lanes that you're with cars that, lined up at each lane. So it's really, I think there are going to be a lot of people crossing here.
So as much as we can use our existing data sources to get some predictive analytics, I think that would just be great. And I think we have the tools to be able to do that in this space. And then my second question, that last slide was a great slide, and we don't need to go into this now, Mr. Neuendorf, but I would like to see the financial sources sooner rather than later. And this is a list, but I would think about, as an example, using a confidence factor, right? You gave 2 examples of, I think one was TIF and one wasn't, or they were both TIF. I wasn't quite sure on that. But I would love to see, with some type of confidence factor with these sources, which of these are more probable than others from a sourcing perspective, sooner rather than later.
Thank you.
We're happy to do that.
Yeah, thank you.
Commissioner Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to just follow up on what Commissioner Pierce was talking about. I found a peer-reviewed study that shows how fast the average 70-year-old walks and how fast the average 80-year-old walks. So when we talk about latency, it'd be interesting to see, what's the population breakdown of this traffic shed, I love that term, or a pedestrian shed in these areas. And then I could give you that study to show the speed, because when we calculated it, my husband and I went out and calculated, if you were 70 years old and you're walking at a normal pace, you're 12 feet from the curb when the light turns red. If you're 80, you're 24 feet from the curb when the light turns red. So if you're 70 or 80 years old, you're not going to feel safe crossing. So that's another data point that we can take into account. I just want to emphasize the neighbors have expressed concerns about safety going underground like that. They've concerned about water. So I just want to say, I think, and I'm super comforted by the fact that this is something we've been looking at for 20 years. I think it is, when we say it's a unique opportunity, I think it is a unique opportunity. I'm comforted by the fact that this is something we've been considering for a long time and that there are studies out there. And I'd like to see it go forward through the lens of making it as safe and as comfortable as possible for people to use, which I know you've been doing, but I just wanted to say that I share that value. So thank you for all the hard work, team.
Good. Commissioner Agnew has the last word.
Thank you. I'm so excited about this, and I think I'm viewing this as building off of Centennial Park. When I hear, there are safety concerns, yes, we need to build with that in mind, but I've never felt unsafe walking around Centennial. I've walked under the bridges, under the passageways, and I have always felt so safe. And so, yes, it's something that we need to be aware of, and we need to design with that in mind. But I think for me, this is just continuing what is already an immeasurable asset to our community. And I get really excited about that. Since we've started talking about this too, every time I go to a new city, I'm just like, I see examples and I get, again, just like revitalized. And I was just recently in Bethesda, Maryland, and it's called Bethesda Row. And it's not exactly the same because they don't have like this underpass, but they have so much parkway. And in a lot of ways, it's similar to like our Southdale area. But they have this strip of building, and it kind of connects kind of thoroughfares on the sides. And I just think how people will be coming from Centennial Lakes Park, and they will be walking, and just that connectivity that we're going to get that isn't there today is phenomenal. My favorite view, in addition to the funding sources, is the one where we look at the population by census tract, because that's so important. Like, there are people living in every quadrant of this community, and what I've heard from people on the west side of France is they want some type of connection. People see that it's brought up, oh, we've been asking about that for years. Like, we think that would be amazing. And so it's so pivotal that we have construction going on both sides and the potential opportunity to do this now. And so and I think Chair Hovland was asking for this as well, but when we get this next view of the different funding sources, I in particular would like to understand how much of this could be done through TIF, especially because we're in the midst of some of those conversations right now. And I know that we're not trying to rush, we're trying to be prompt, but that necessitates us thinking through this before any things are finalized from a TIF perspective. So I think the timing is right. I get really excited about this. And ultimately, like this is an extension of an amazing asset that we have as a community. So thank you for the work that you've done. And I look forward to opportunities of us as a commission and as a council to continue talking about this, because it's clear that there are some additional questions and things that we want to flesh out. But I hope that we can do that on an agenda sooner rather than later, because it always feels like we're crunched for time. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for going over the normal close down time of 9 o'clock. So we really got a lot done today. Really appreciate the update. And if no one has anything they want to advise us of from a HRA Commissioner comment standpoint, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Jackson, second by Commissioner Pierce to adjourn the meeting of the HRA this 29th day of August, 2024. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. We stand adjourned. Great comments from down here.